It began not with a public announcement, but with a carefully worded silence, one that echoed louder than any royal proclamation. Behind closed doors at Clarence House, a conversation unfolded that would quietly reshape the future of royal patronages. And when King Charles III and Sophie, Duchess of Edinburgh, emerged with a joint statement, it was clear. Something fundamental had shifted within the monarchy's inner workings. Before we go deeper into what this really means for the royal family, make sure to subscribe so you don't miss a single update. The announcement did not arrive with fanfare. There were no grand processions, no dramatic press briefings, no triumphant declarations echoing through palace courtyards. Instead, it slipped into the public domain with a kind of quiet authority that immediately unsettled those who understood how rarely such moments occur. A joint statement, carefully phrased, tightly controlled, was released under both names, a detail that insiders quickly identified as significant. Because in the rigid architecture of royal communication, nothing is ever accidental. Every word is measured. Every name attached carries weight. And the presence of Sophie alongside the king suggested not just support, but alignment and intentional pairing that hinted at something far deeper than routine coordination. For weeks, perhaps longer, there had been murmurs within palace corridors. Subtle shifts, unusual meetings, advisors summoned at odd hours, schedules rearranged with little explanation. Reports suggest that internal discussions had been ongoing, though no clear narrative ever surfaced publicly. Those closest to the administrative machinery of the crown began to sense that something was building, something deliberate, calculated, and potentially transformative. Yet outwardly, everything remained composed. Engagements continued. Appearances were maintained. The illusion of continuity held firm, even as the foundations beneath it quietly shifted. Then came the language of the statement itself, measured but decisive, calm yet unmistakably firm. It spoke of future alignment, of ensuring the continued relevance of royal patronages, of adapting to evolving responsibilities. To the casual observer, it may have sounded like standard institutional language, polished and predictable. But to those who study the monarchy closely, these phrases carried an unmistakable undertone. They suggested movement, change, perhaps even correction, and the absence of certain expected reassurances only deepened the intrigue. Because sometimes, what is left unsaid speaks louder than anything placed on the record. Timing, too, raised questions that could not be easily dismissed. Since early 2024, King Charles III has been navigating the immense pressures of his reign while managing ongoing health concerns, pressures that have inevitably reshaped how he approaches leadership. His public appearances have been more selective, his energy more carefully allocated. And within that reality, the decision to initiate what appears to be a structural reconsideration of royal patronages feels anything but coincidental. Insiders whisper that urgency has crept into decision-making, that the king is increasingly focused on defining not just his reign, but its lasting impact. And in that context, this statement begins to feel less like an isolated announcement and more like the opening move in a much larger strategy. At the same time, Sophie's role in this moment cannot be overlooked. For years, she has operated with quiet consistency, never courting headlines, never seeking attention, yet steadily building a reputation as one of the most dependable figures within the royal framework. Now, her visibility is changing. Her presence in this announcement signals not just trust, but responsibility, a shift from supportive figure to active participant in shaping the monarchy's future direction. And that transformation, subtle as it may appear, carries implications that extend far beyond a single statement, because when someone like Sophie steps forward in this way, it is rarely without purpose. Almost immediately, media circles began to react. Analysts dissected every word. Commentators revisited past patterns, searching for parallels. Some speculated about redistribution, about certain patronages being reassigned, consolidated, or even quietly withdrawn. Others questioned whether this marked the beginning of a broader recalibration of royal roles, one that could redefine who holds influence within the institution. And while no definitive answers emerged, one thing became increasingly clear. This was not routine. This was not symbolic. This was structural. Yet beneath all the speculation, all the analysis, all the carefully constructed theories, a deeper tension lingered, one that could not be easily articulated, but was unmistakably present. Because patronages are not just ceremonial roles. They are threads woven into the fabric of royal identity. They represent trust, visibility, and power in ways that are rarely acknowledged openly. To adjust them is to alter something fundamental, and as the implications of that reality began to unfold, the quiet statement from Clarence House took on a far more formidable presence. But this wasn't just about public duties, it was about control over a legacy system that defines the monarchy itself. To the public, royal patronages appear ceremonial ribbon cuttings, speeches, polite applause. But within palace walls, they are something far more powerful. Influence networks, legacy markers, and quiet instruments of control. And now, that entire system is being reconsidered. What most people see is only the surface: a royal figure arriving at an event, offering a few words, lending their name to a cause. It feels symbolic, almost routine. But behind that carefully maintained image lies a far more intricate reality, one that has been quietly shaping the monarchy for generations. A patronage is not just an honorary title, it is a signal. It tells institutions where the crown's attention rests, where its trust is placed, and where its influence quietly flows. When a royal attaches their name to an organization, it elevates it, protects it, and, in many ways, binds it into the wider structure of the monarchy itself. And that connection, once formed, is rarely accidental. This system did not emerge overnight. Its roots stretch deep into history, back to an era when the monarchy's role was far more direct, far more intertwined with the daily functioning of the nation. Under Queen Victoria, patronages became a formalized extension of royal duty, a way to maintain relevance while reinforcing authority. They allowed the crown to remain present in every corner of society without overtly exercising power. Over time, this network expanded, evolving into a vast web of relationships that linked the monarchy to charities, institutions, and cultural bodies across the country and beyond. What began as a gesture of support transformed into something far more enduring. A system of alignment, where loyalty and recognition moved quietly between the crown and the organizations it endorsed. Today, that network is immense. Hundreds of organizations, some historic, others modern, exist under the umbrella of royal patronage. Each one carries not just prestige, but expectation. And within this scale lies a subtle hierarchy, one that is rarely discussed openly, but is deeply understood within royal circles. Not all patronages are equal. Some are symbolic, tied to tradition. Others carry strategic importance, influencing sectors that shape public life. And who holds these patronages matters. It determines visibility, relevance, and, perhaps most importantly, influence within the institution itself. Because in a system where direct power is limited, these quiet connections become the currency of authority. This is where the deeper tension begins to surface. Because assigning a patronage is not simply about matching a royal to a cause, it is about positioning. It reflects trust, responsibility, and sometimes even favor. Over the years, certain figures have built entire identities around the patronages they hold, using them to define their place within the monarchy. Others have seen their roles diminish, their influence quietly reduced as responsibilities shift elsewhere. And while these changes are rarely announced with clarity, they are always felt. Insiders understand the signals. They recognize when a patronage is reassigned, when attention is redirected, when the balance begins to tilt. Which is precisely why changes to this system are so rare and so carefully managed when they do occur. To alter patronages is to disrupt a delicate equilibrium, one that has been maintained through years of quiet negotiation and unspoken understanding. It risks creating uncertainty, raising questions about status, relevance, and future roles. And within an institution that thrives on stability and continuity, such risks are not taken lightly. Decisions are often delayed, softened, or hidden behind carefully chosen language, ensuring that the outward appearance of order remains intact even as internal adjustments are made. Yet now, something is different. The joint statement has brought this hidden system into focus, hinting at a level of reconsideration that cannot be easily dismissed. It suggests that the quiet balance is being reassessed, that the established order may no longer be sufficient for what lies ahead. And as this realization begins to settle, a deeper question emerges, one that lingers beneath every analysis, every speculation, every whispered conversation within palace walls. Because if patronages are being redefined, then so too is the structure of influence itself. So why now, Why risk unsettling such a carefully balanced structure? Since early 2024, King Charles III has ruled under a shadow, his health, a constant concern, his time, increasingly precious. And with that pressure has come a new urgency to define what his reign will ultimately stand for. What was once a carefully paced transition into kingship has, by necessity, become something far more compressed, far more intense. The rhythm of royal life, long planned, meticulously structured, has shifted. Engagements once taken for granted are now weighed against energy, against endurance, against the quiet but undeniable reality that time is no longer an open horizon. And in that space, something changes within a leader. Priorities sharpen. Decisions that might have been delayed are suddenly brought forward. Because when the margin for hesitation narrows, clarity becomes not just important, it becomes essential. Reports suggest that the king's workload has been quietly adjusted, though never publicly framed as such. Appearances remain, duties continue, but the scale has shifted in ways that insiders understand even if the public does not fully see it. There is a growing reliance on those closest to the core of the institution's senior working royals, whose presence now carries more weight than ever before. Responsibilities are being redistributed, not abruptly, but with a deliberate precision that hints at careful planning behind the scenes. Each adjustment, each reassignment, feels like part of a broader design, one that is unfolding slowly, almost imperceptibly, yet with undeniable intent. And within that unfolding, a deeper need has begun to surface. The need to streamline, to refine, to ensure that every role within the monarchy serves a clear and purposeful function. Because the reality Charles faces is not just personal, it is institutional. The monarchy, as an enduring entity, cannot afford ambiguity in moments of transition. It requires structure, continuity, strength. And so, what might once have been seen as optional adjustments now take on a far greater significance. They become necessary steps in securing stability, in reinforcing the framework that will carry the institution forward. There is also the question of legacy, perhaps the most powerful force driving this moment. For any monarch, the desire to define their reign is ever present. But under these circumstances, that desire becomes more urgent, more focused. It is no longer about gradual evolution, it is about decisive shaping. What will endure? What will be remembered? What structures will remain when the immediate pressures have passed? These are not abstract considerations, they are active concerns, influencing decisions that ripple through every level of the royal system. And patronages, with their deep ties to influence and identity, sit directly within that sphere of consideration. Insiders whisper of a quiet restructuring taking place within palace administration, a phrase that, while understated, carries significant weight. It suggests movement beneath the surface. Adjustments being made not for immediate visibility, but for long-term impact. Processes being refined, roles being reconsidered. And while these changes are rarely confirmed openly, their effects are beginning to be felt. The system is being recalibrated, piece by piece, in a way that aligns with a broader vision, one that is still taking shape, but already influencing the present. And then there is the undeniable weight of succession planning. Not as a distant concept, but as an active reality. The future of the monarchy is no longer an abstract timeline, it is a living consideration, shaping decisions in real time. Every adjustment, every strategic move, carries within it an awareness of what comes next, of how the institution will transition, how it will sustain itself, how it will continue to command trust in an increasingly complex world. This awareness does not create panic, it creates focus. But it also introduces a quiet tension, one that lingers beneath even the most composed public appearances. Because beneath the calm exterior, beneath the carefully maintained image of continuity, there is a sense that something is shifting, something deliberate, something necessary, but also something that cannot be undone once fully set in motion. And as this realization begins to settle, the earlier statement about patronages starts to feel less like an isolated adjustment and more like part of a much larger transformation. A transformation shaped not just by circumstance, but by intention. But Charles wasn't acting alone. Standing beside him was someone whose role has been steadily, almost silently, expanding. For years, she operated just outside the spotlight, reliable, composed, and unwavering. But now, Sophie, Duchess of Edinburgh, is stepping into a position few anticipated, becoming a central figure in the monarchy's evolving structure. There was never a moment of sudden arrival, no dramatic shift that announced her rise in a single stroke. Instead, it was built slowly, almost imperceptibly, over years of consistent service. While others commanded headlines or became the focus of intense scrutiny, Sophie remained steady present, dependable, quietly effective. It was a role that rarely drew attention, yet within palace circles, it earned something far more valuable than visibility. Trust, the kind of trust that is not given lightly, and once established, becomes the foundation for far greater responsibility. That foundation is now revealing its true significance, because as the demands on the monarchy have intensified, and as the need for stability has grown more urgent, Sophie's presence has begun to expand in ways that feel both natural and deliberate. Her public engagements have increased, not in a sudden surge, but in a measured strategic progression. International visits, high-level meetings, sensitive causes, each assignment carries weight, each one reinforcing her role as a figure capable of navigating complexity without creating controversy. And in an institution where missteps can echo far beyond the moment, that ability is not just valuable, it is essential. What makes her position even more compelling is the perception that surrounds her. She is seen as a unifying force, someone who operates above internal tensions and external pressures. There are no dramatic narratives attached to her, no polarizing debates that follow her presence. Instead, there is a sense of quiet reliability, of continuity in a time that increasingly demands reassurance. And that perception, carefully built over time, now serves a larger purpose. Because in moments of transition, the monarchy does not simply need visibility, it needs figures who can carry responsibility without drawing instability in their wake. Her alignment with King Charles III's vision is another layer that cannot be ignored. The concept of a slimmed-down monarchy has been discussed for years, often in abstract terms. But now, it is taking form, becoming a practical framework that requires careful execution. Fewer working royals, greater efficiency, clearer roles. And within that structure, every individual must serve a defined purpose. Sophie fits this model with remarkable precision. She does not disrupt the balance, she reinforces it. She does not compete for space, she fills the gaps that need to be secured. Her involvement in key charitable and diplomatic roles further strengthens this position. These are not ceremonial appearances alone. They are engagements that require sensitivity, awareness, and the ability to represent the crown in environments where nuance matters. Whether addressing complex social issues or engaging with international partners, she carries a presence that is both approachable and authoritative. And in doing so, she extends the monarchy's reach in ways that feel authentic rather than imposed. But perhaps the most critical factor lies in her suitability for handling the evolving structure of patronages. This is not a role that demands spectacle, it demands judgment. The ability to understand which connections matter, which alignments strengthen the institution, and which adjustments must be made without creating unnecessary disruption. Sophie's history within the monarchy has prepared her for precisely this kind of responsibility. She understands the system not as an outsider stepping in, but as someone who has quietly observed, learned, and adapted over time. And as these threads begin to converge her experience, her reputation, her growing role the picture becomes clearer. This is not simply an expansion of duties. It is a strategic positioning, one that places her at the center of a transformation that is still unfolding. A transformation that requires both strength and subtlety, both presence and restraint. And as the monarchy moves toward defining its next chapter, her role within it is no longer peripheral, it is essential. And together, their vision would soon be formalized in a statement that carried far more weight than it first appeared. The words were carefully chosen, measured, deliberate, almost understated. But beneath the surface of that joint statement lay a blueprint for transformation, one that insiders say could redefine how royal patronages are assigned, retained, and even revoked. At first glance, the language appeared familiar, even predictable. Phrases like future alignment and strategic focus seemed to echo the kind of institutional wording the public has come to expect: calm, composed, and intentionally vague. But within palace circles, those same phrases carried a very different weight. They were not filler. They were signals. Carefully placed markers that suggested something far more calculated unfolding behind the scenes. Because in the monarchy, Words are never simply chosen for elegance, they are chosen for precision, each one designed to reveal just enough while concealing the full scope of what is actually being set in motion. Future alignment in particular has drawn intense scrutiny. On the surface, it suggests coordination, a simple effort to ensure that royal roles reflect broader priorities. But insiders whisper that it may point to something more decisive, a recalibration of who represents what and why. A quiet but firm shift away from tradition for tradition's sake toward a system where every patronage must justify its place within a modern, evolving institution. And that implication carries consequences. Because if alignment becomes the standard, then misalignment, whether through inactivity, controversy, or shifting priorities, could lead to reassessment. And reassessment, in this context, is rarely a neutral process. Then there is the phrase strategic focus, another seemingly harmless expression that, upon closer examination, reveals a sharper edge. Strategy implies intention. It suggests that decisions are no longer being made reactively or out of habit, but as part of a coordinated plan. A plan that may involve consolidating responsibilities, redirecting attention, and, perhaps most significantly, reducing the number of patronages held by any one individual. The idea itself is subtle, but its impact could be profound. Because within a system where patronages define presence and influence, any form of consolidation inevitably reshapes the internal balance of power. This is where the conversation becomes more complex, more charged. Because embedded within these phrases is an implicit message, one that speaks not just to structure, but to accountability. The suggestion that patronages may no longer be held indefinitely, that performance, engagement, and alignment with the monarchy's broader vision could become determining factors in their continuation. It is a shift that introduces a new kind of expectation, one that transforms patronages from static honors into active responsibilities. And for those who hold them, that shift may feel less like an adjustment and more like a quiet reckoning. Royal commentators were quick to sense this undertone. Analysts across major outlets began dissecting the statement, not just for what it said, but for what it implied. Some described it as a modernization effort, a necessary evolution in response to changing public expectations. Others were more cautious, suggesting that it could mark the beginning of a more selective, perhaps even more exclusive, approach to royal duties. And then there were those who saw it as something deeper, a structural reset disguised as refinement, a moment where the monarchy subtly redefines its own internal rules without ever stating them outright. Speculation, inevitably, followed. Quiet discussions began to surface about which royals might be affected, whose roles might expand, and whose could diminish. No names were confirmed, no decisions announced. Yet the mere possibility introduced a new layer of tension, one that rippled through both media narratives and internal dynamics. Because even the suggestion of change within such a tightly controlled system has the power to unsettle. It forces questions that are rarely asked openly about relevance, about contribution, about the future place of each individual within the institution. And as these questions lingered, the statement itself began to feel less like a conclusion and more like a beginning. A carefully constructed opening move in a process that is still unfolding, still revealing itself piece by piece. Because beneath the calm, beneath the precision, beneath the deliberate restraint, there is a sense that something significant has already been set in motion, something that cannot easily be reversed once fully realized. But behind those polished words was a deeper reality, one that hinted at difficult decisions already being made. Even before the public absorbed the statement, changes were already underway. Invitations shifted, roles subtly reassigned, and within palace circles, it became clear. The reshuffle wasn't coming, it had already begun. What appeared, on the surface, to be a single announcement was in reality the visible edge of a much deeper movement, one that had been quietly unfolding behind closed doors for weeks, perhaps even months. Reports suggest that royal schedules had already begun to change in subtle but telling ways. Engagements once considered routine were quietly reassigned. Appearances that had long been tied to specific individuals were now handled by others, sometimes without explanation, sometimes without acknowledgement. To the casual observer, these shifts were easy to miss. But to those who understand the rhythm of royal duty, they were unmistakable signals that something deliberate was taking shape. Organizations, too, began to feel the shift. Some found themselves under quiet review, their connections to the crown reassessed with a level of scrutiny that insiders describe as unusual. Others experienced a more direct transition, their patronages reassigned with little public fanfare. There were no dramatic announcements, no clear declarations of change, only a gradual redirection that hinted at a larger pattern. Because within the monarchy, the most significant transformations are rarely announced outright. They are implemented in stages, carefully managed to avoid disruption, yet precise enough to reshape the structure over time. And at the center of this movement was a noticeable recalibration of roles among senior royals. Some began to take on expanded responsibilities, stepping into spaces that had previously been defined by others. Their presence became more prominent, their influence more visible, their alignment with the institution's evolving priorities more apparent. At the same time, others seemed to recede not abruptly, not dramatically, but with a quiet reduction in visibility that spoke volumes without ever stating its intent. It was not a removal, but a repositioning. A shift that suggested the monarchy was beginning to redefine not just what roles existed, but who was best suited to fulfill them. This evolving structure also revealed something else, something more strategic, more controlled. Insiders whisper of a more centralized decision-making process taking hold, one that consolidates authority in a way that ensures consistency and alignment across the institution. Decisions that may once have been distributed across various channels now appear to be guided by a more focused core, a smaller circle of influence that shapes the direction with greater precision. It is a change that reflects both necessity and intention, a response to the growing complexity of maintaining a modern monarchy while preserving its traditional foundations. Those closest to the process describe it as controlled but significant, a phrase that captures both the restraint and the impact of what is happening. Controlled, because every adjustment is measured, every shift carefully managed to maintain stability. Significant, because the cumulative effect of these changes is impossible to ignore. The system is not being dismantled, it is being refined, reorganized, strengthened in ways that may not be immediately visible, but will ultimately define how the monarchy operates moving forward. And within this transformation lies the emergence of a new operational structure, one that prioritizes clarity, efficiency, and alignment over tradition alone. A structure where roles are not simply inherited or maintained out of precedent, but rather created and developed through a process of negotiation and agreement, but evaluated based on their relevance and contribution to the institution's broader purpose. It is a subtle shift, but a powerful one, because it signals a move toward a monarchy that is not just sustained by history, but actively shaped by present realities. Yet as these changes continue to unfold, as the quiet reshuffle becomes more apparent with each passing adjustment, a deeper tension begins to take hold. Because transformation, no matter how controlled, always carries consequences. And within an institution built on continuity, even the smallest shifts can echo far beyond their immediate impact. And as the dust began to settle, a larger question emerged: what does this mean for the monarchy's future? This isn't just a reshuffle, it's a redefinition. The monarchy that emerges from this moment may look familiar on the surface, but beneath it, the foundations are shifting in ways that could shape its relevance for decades to come. What is unfolding now is not simply a matter of adjusting roles or redistributing responsibilities. It is something far more deliberate, a recalibration of purpose. For years, the idea of a slimmed-down monarchy has been discussed in measured tones, often presented as a distant goal rather than an immediate necessity. But now, under the weight of circumstance and expectation, that concept is no longer theoretical. It is being realized in real time. And with that realization comes a quiet but undeniable shift in how the institution defines itself. At the heart of this transformation is the move toward efficiency. Fewer working royals, clearer roles. A structure that prioritizes function over formality. It is a departure from the expansive model of the past, where presence alone was often enough to sustain relevance. Now, presence must be purposeful. Every engagement, every patronage, every public appearance is expected to carry meaning, to contribute to a broader narrative of service and impact. And while this approach may strengthen the institution in the long term, it also raises the stakes for those within it. Because with fewer roles comes greater scrutiny, and with greater scrutiny comes a new kind of pressure. For those who remain at the center of this streamlined structure, expectations are no longer passive, they are active, demanding, and continuous. It is no longer sufficient to simply hold a title or maintain a connection. Contribution must be visible. Engagement must be consistent. And alignment with the monarchy's evolving priorities must be unmistakable. This shift introduces a dynamic that is both empowering and unforgiving. Empowering because it allows individuals to define their roles with clarity and purpose. Unforgiving because it leaves little room for ambiguity or disengagement. In this new framework, every action or inaction carries weight. Patronages, in particular, are being reimagined through this lens of impact. No longer seen as static honors, they are becoming active instruments of influence. The focus is shifting toward measurable contribution, toward partnerships that reflect not just tradition, but relevance in a rapidly changing world. This means that some connections will deepen, while others may quietly fade. It means that the value of a patronage will increasingly be tied to its ability to resonate with contemporary society, to address real issues, to demonstrate tangible engagement. And in doing so, the monarchy is signaling a willingness to adapt carefully, cautiously, but unmistakably. Yet this evolution is not without its challenges. Because the monarchy exists at the intersection of history and modernity, tradition and expectation. To change too quickly risks losing the very identity that defines it. To change too slowly risks becoming disconnected from the world it seeks to serve. And so, every adjustment must be balanced, every decision weighed against both past and future. It is a delicate negotiation, one that requires not just strategy, but sensitivity. And within that negotiation lies the true complexity of what is happening now. The long-term implications of this shift extend far beyond the present moment. They touch on the very structure of the royal hierarchy, on how roles are defined, how influence is distributed, how the institution sustains itself across generations. A streamlined monarchy is not just smaller, it is more focused, more intentional, more reliant on those who carry its responsibilities. And as this model takes shape, it will inevitably redefine the expectations placed on future generations, shaping not just what they inherit, but how they are expected to serve. There is a sense, subtle but persistent, that the monarchy is entering a new phase one that is less about preserving what has always been and more about ensuring what can continue. It is a shift that does not reject tradition, but reframes it, placing it within a context that allows it to endure. And as this process continues, as each adjustment builds upon the last, the institution moves closer to a version of itself that is both familiar and fundamentally changed. But in the end, this transformation speaks to something deeper than structure, it speaks to legacy. In the quiet corridors of royal history, legacy is everything. And with this single, carefully crafted statement, King Charles III and Sophie, Duchess of Edinburgh, may have just drawn the line between what the monarchy was and what it must now become. For centuries, the crown has been defined not simply as a symbol of power, but as something far more enduring, a sacred trust held on behalf of the nation. It is an idea that transcends individuals, one that demands continuity even as generations change. And yet, within that permanence lies an unspoken truth. The monarchy must evolve to survive. It must adapt without appearing to break, shift without losing its center. This delicate balance has always been its greatest challenge. Now, it has become its defining test, because what is happening in this moment is not just a refinement of roles or a reallocation of duties, it is a conscious effort to preserve the institution by reshaping it from within. For King Charles III, this moment carries a weight that is both personal and historical. His reign, shaped by circumstance and marked by urgency, is being defined not over decades, but within a compressed span of time that demands clarity and conviction. There is a quiet determination in the choices being made, a sense that every decision must contribute to something lasting, something that will endure beyond the immediate pressures of the present. It is not about dramatic gestures or sweeping declarations. It is about precision, about ensuring that the structures he leaves behind are strong enough to carry the monarchy forward, even as the world around it continues to change. And within that effort, Sophie's role emerges not as an accessory, but as a stabilizing force, steady, measured, and deeply aligned with the direction the monarchy is taking. She represents continuity in its most reassuring form, a presence that bridges the gap between tradition and transformation. Her rise is not disruptive, it is grounding. In a time when uncertainty could easily take hold, she offers something far more valuable: consistency. And that consistency allows the broader changes to unfold without fracturing the institution's sense of identity. What makes this moment so significant is the way it balances two opposing forces. On one side, there is the weight of history, the expectations, the traditions, the legacy that cannot simply be set aside. On the other, there is the undeniable pressure of modern reality, a world that demands relevance, transparency, and purpose. The monarchy stands between these forces, navigating a path that must honor both. And in doing so, it reveals its true nature, not as a static institution, but as one that survives through careful adaptation. Public perception, too, plays a critical role in this transformation. Trust is not guaranteed; it must be maintained, reinforced, earned again and again. Every decision, every adjustment, every subtle shift contributes to how the monarchy is understood by those it serves. And in this moment, there is a clear effort to align that perception with a renewed sense of purpose, to demonstrate that the crown is not simply enduring, but actively evolving in response to the needs of the present. It is a message that must be conveyed without words, understood without explanation, and accepted without resistance. And at the heart of it all lies a principle that has defined the monarchy at its strongest moments: duty over personal influence. The understanding that the institution must always come before the individual. That legacy is not about personal legacy alone, but about the continuity of something far greater. This principle, though rarely spoken aloud, underpins every decision being made. It is what allows difficult choices to be justified, what ensures that the monarchy remains anchored even as it shifts. Because in the end, the crown isn't just inherited, it's protected, redefined, and, when necessary, quietly reshaped for the generations yet to come. Thanks for watching. Please don't forget to like and subscribe, and we will see you in the next one.